This morning's sermon is entitled, Very Good Indeed. My interest is piqued by the word very in this morning's text, especially when the word very is combined with the word good. We've all read the first creation story in Genesis enough times to recognize the import of the phrase very good. God creates each part of creation, land and skies and sea, vegetation, morning and evening lights, heavenly lights, people and critters and swimming things and everything else that fills up the universe. And then God calls the whole of creation, every piece of it, very good. This is wonderful, because it means that God affirms each individual part of creation while at the same time reminding us that the whole of creation is even more delightful than the sum of its parts. And it's also worth stressing that this is the very first thing we hear in all of our sacred scriptures. We are made in the image of God, each one of us created as good entities, and collectively, our universe is a very good entity. But Sardis, I have a confession for you this morning. I've never explored the definition of the word very. And if you asked me to give a synonym for the phrase very good, my first and only response would be great. And it turns out that would be a really poor answer. I was surprised to learn that Merriam-Webster's dictionary offers two definitions of the word very. Two definitions of the word very. The first is a high degree of something. Very can mean a high degree of something. And the second definition of very means that very can be the precise amount of something. Very can be the precise amount. I love this second definition, the idea that very means precise. God has made each one of us the precise amount of good. This speaks to the care and concern God shows for creation, but it also reminds us that we are enough. God made the world, and then God sat down in a lawn chair. I'll let you decide what kind of beverage choice was selected. God surveyed creation, and God said, wow, look what I've made. It's so good, just the right amount of good. And I am so happy, and I'm so proud about it. And I'm so in love with this creation of mine. The word great doesn't do justice to God's creative work. The phrase very good reminds us of God's ruach, that parenting, loving force that breathes life into each one of us. Very good indeed. This morning, the psalmist exclaims, "How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity." How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. I dare say it is just the right amount of good when kindred, that is, all of humanity and all of creation, live together in unity. We hear this exclamation on the heels of Holy Week. In the season of Easter ahead, I hear the psalmist and the earliest followers of Jesus calling us to do three things in order that we might live together in unity. First, we need to make space at our own tables and in our own hearts for neighbors near and far. We've got to make space at our own tables. Second thing is we need to be willing to use our tables as a means to break down oppressive systems. We need to use our tables to break down oppressive systems. And third, we need to consider that kindred is, in R, a super inclusive term. Kindred includes humanity and everything that fills creation. So, how are our tables part of this process? I think about our Maundy, Thursday table, and indeed every communion table. Jesus gathered the disciples together. I think a better way to say it is that Jesus gathered together all of the good things that Jesus had around him. His friends, and a few dozen wobbly chairs, and a plain but sturdy table, and some day-old bread from the Merita bakery outlet, and a few bottles of cheap wine. And Jesus and his friends huddled in a room with the best rate on Verbo. And I think what Jesus was saying to them and to us as well was this: when you gather with the people you love, when you celebrate their humanity, when you commit to relationships that are transformative, those that include a cycle of loving and hurting and forgiving and healing and loving again, you are doing precisely what is good. You are living together in unity. And every time you do that, Jesus says, I'm going to be there with you. And how, Sardis Baptist Church, might our tables be a means to breaking down oppressive systems? I think about the empty tomb. And even more so, I think about the resilient women who left that place, and eventually the resilient men too. Because I think in advancing the Jesus movement, what these kindred of ours were actually saying to each one of us was this: the right amount of good, the life-giving amount of good, occurs when people decide to wheel the communion table out of the upper room and roll it right down Main Street. Because to live with the right amount of good is not to advance nor be beholden to systems that choose their dinner guests on the artificial whims of privilege and power. To live with the right amount of good is to work for communities where there is no quota on dinner guests and where every extra chair adds to the whole. We're working, Sardis Baptist Church, for a world where we notice God's goodness in everybody and where we allow that goodness to live and to thrive and to partner in collaborative, loving communities. Finally, Sardis Baptist Church, our tables don't just include people. I had communion with friends from Sardis at a tailgate last week. But this week, I've been having communion with another kind of family. I spent the better part of Tuesday and Wednesday reclaiming a soggy section of our backyard for a new garden. And while I was back there, I met a king snake and some Carolina wrens and a few cardinals and lots of butterflies and all kinds of creeping things buried deep within a leafy, mulchy mix. I noticed my extended family making their own tables, and I wondered, how often do we choose to let the natural spaces we occupy offer welcome to our extended kin? Our seed in the feeder for birds and squirrels at my house, and sweet water for the hummingbirds, and a few of this year's tomatoes for the rabbits and chipmunks, are each of these things not also a form of communion? Will the garden I'm growing, and I'm crossing my fingers it bears fruit, will this garden become a kind of table where bees and birds and insects and other creatures can both find nourishment and give life to new things? And I wonder, what kind of example of radical and inclusive welcome might insect and flower and bird model for each one of us? I believe we have the capacity to create tables and the capacity to share our tables with neighbors and the capacity to imagine limitless boundaries in how we define our table participants. I also know that when I share these thoughts, I must compete with the harsh realities of our world. With a tragic shooting in Rock Hill this past week and a deepening environmental crisis, and heartbreaking tales of families fleeing violence from Central America and our country's utterly impotent response to such a crisis, and so many micro accounts of injustice near and far. What need do we have of pie in the sky, rah rah psalms? Well, I don't think the psalmist or Jesus or any prophet, new or old, promises us an absence of evil and pain and grief and difficulties. But I do think prophets, both new and old, remind us that we can find strength and we can find hope and we can find refuge and we can find life in our shared vulnerabilities. When we break bread together, we share the ups and downs of the human experience. When we choose to notice both the intimacy and vastness of God's creation, we experience those things that are very good. In so doing, we create those things that are lasting, those things that are real, those things that are collaborative. I think we learned that death is not the final word. We create the possibility that radical hospitality, first individually and next systemically, can loosen this world's obsession with borders and titles and security and disconnectedness and hopelessness. And so we keep on and we keep at it. The work of unity is intentional and it's hard and it requires consistency and patience, lots of patience. And Easter hope, not just on the sunrise of Resurrection Sunday, but every day the sun rises. Of course, the psalmist offers us encouragement. This life sharing, this goodness, this unity making is in abundance. It flows like oil from Aaron's beard. It is replenished each morning like Hermon's dew, the same dew that provided manna in the Exodus. God has ordained life forevermore. Friends, may we seek this life, the consortium of the very good, by expanding our tables and reimagining the guests who can fill them. And in so doing, may we know the pleasantry of unity. Friends, may it be so, and may it be soon. Amen.